Welcome to Las Vegas. My name is Rachel Hansen and I'm the marketing manager for Contec Healthcare. We are here in Vegas for the 2022 ASHP show. On November 1st, USP released their new published standards and Contec Healthcare hosted a webinar where our clinical support manager Michael Myers walked us through some of those new changes. Along with that webinar, we received over 100 questions from you. And so today we are going to answer some of those questions that we weren't able to get to at the past webinar. Right now I'm going to hand it over to Michael and our expert panel over at Mandalay Bay at the ASHP show to get our panel started.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm so excited to be here with this group of folks this morning. First of all, a couple of faces you're probably familiar with. On the end, Kedar Patel, our Senior Product Manager, Dr. Mark Weinsick, our lead microbiologist, and I'm Michael Myers, the Clinical Support Manager for Contec Healthcare. So this morning we're going to answer a lot of questions, but most of them came in, we're dealing with what Contec is in our scope of cleaning and disinfecting, hand hygiene and garbing. But we did get some questions that were sort of outside of that scope, but we wanted to get you answers to those. So we brought in Melanie and Mary from Critical Compounding Resources. Tell them a little bit about yourselves.
Thank you so much, Michael. My name is Melanie Dory. I'm a registered pharmacy technician from Canada, and I'm the co-owner of Critical Compounding Resources. And we're so thrilled to be here to be able to answer some of those non-cleaning and disinfection questions that are related to the new chapter.
Hi everyone, I'm Mary Nazell, and I am Melanie's partner with Critical Compounding Resources. I'm a pharmacist by background, and like Melanie, excited to be here and help you guys answer those questions.
Well, let's jump right into it. Kedar, I'm going to start with you down there. You know, one of the new regulations in the chapter is relating to sterile disinfectants inside of the PEC. So there were people just wanting to really understand that. They were serious. They definitely, they weren't kidding. You have to use sterile disinfectants at the PEC, but that does cause somewhat of a change for Contec products versus Preempt and our TB1.
Yes, so as you probably know, you're going to need a sterile disinfectant in that PEC. So we do have an offering. Unfortunately, Preempt Plus is not capable of being sterilized, but we do have you covered. We have the Contec Healthcare TB1 3300, not only in solution, but we also now have it in wipes.
Yep, so definitely reach out to your Contec rep and make sure that if you have been using Preempt in your PEC that you're going to transition over to one of those sterile disinfectants. You know, a lot of people sort of ask us why that happened, and I think when you look at what the Compounding Expert Committee did and their general hope to try and prevent harm and prevent anything from getting in there, you know, we're already using sterile gloves and sterile alcohol. It just makes sense to have sterile disinfectants and wipes. All right, so keeping on the Paradox scope, someone asks, when the Paradox bottle is open, does it need to be kept in that PEC or classified room, or are they asking sort of, are they a one-time bottle?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, as, you know, Michael, you teach best practices all over the place, and what we try to encourage is that if you open it in a classified space, you keep it in that classified space. If you're having to move it outside of that to a lesser classified space, then we ask that you keep it in there and make sure that you maintain where that stays.
Paradox is our sporicidal, 3 minutes, you know, but there is, we had several questions come in about how the chapter defines sporicide. And Mark, there is sort of a difference in what the EPA says and sort of how the chapter is defining it. When people are trying to look for a sporicide, what do they really need to look for?
Well, the debate or the issue is that the chapter talks about a sporicide is used to kill bacterial and fungal spores. But the EPA really looks at a fungicide, which say TB1 3300, even Preempt Plus. These are effective fungicides. And these fungicides can kill both fungal, vegetative fungi, as well as fungal spores. So when the chapter really talks about a sporicide, they're really talking about the frequency of using a stronger product to kill the hardest things there are to kill, which are the bacterial spores. And so these are bacillus, these are other types of species of spore-forming bacteria that are not able to be killed by anything other than an EPA-registered sporicide. And that's how the EPA defines that. And that's really what you need to target when you select those products.
Thank you, Mark. Couple of questions came in sort of outside of the scope, as I mentioned. So Melanie and Mary, there were several questions about pathogen sampling frequency, and specifically which pathogens, they asked which pathogens significantly compromise preparations made in the room and what actions need to be taken.
All right. So most of you know that they have taken out the requirement to check to the genus level with highly pathogenic organisms. So the chapter doesn't really get into talking about what organisms are typically found in the clean room, but there's lots of them: Staphylococcus, Micrococcus, yeast, molds, many different things. So when you have an exceeded action level, what you're going to want to do is do an investigation and make sure that work with the microbiologist and look at what pathogens you're finding in those exceeded action levels. You're going to want to assess your facility. Hopefully you've looked at your certification report and made sure that the room is compliant, your HEPA filters don't have leaks, but you're also going to want to look at your operations, because most of the bacteria or microbes brought into the clean room are brought in by humans. So you want to look at your material wipe down processes, your hand hygiene and garbing processes, and try to identify areas where you can minimize the introduction of those microbes into your facilities.
Thank you. Excellent. So we're just going to keep rolling along. We've got a lot of questions to get through. It's interesting. We had probably 5 or 6 questions come in specifically about eyelash extensions, and then 3 or 4 about fingernails. So I do get why there's some confusion, because the chapter does not distinguish between cosmetics and sort of what you would call those sort of semi-temporary cosmetics. It just sort of says no cosmetics. And in fact, during the sort of stakeholder engagement fact-finding portion, they had those meetings, open forums, and they were specifically asked about eyelash extensions. They kind of skirted it. They just said no cosmetics are allowed. Right. But they did add a little caveat saying the designated person may permit accommodations as long as the quality of the CSP and the environment will not be affected. So if they ask me, I just sort of say the rules are kind of, simple. No cosmetics means no cosmetics, but you guys live and work in compounding environments. So with eyelash extensions and fingernails, how would you handle that in your clean room?
Well, I just like to start off by distinguishing the different eyelash extensions. So like you mentioned, there are semi-permanent eyelash extensions, and they're the ones that you apply every day as a cosmetic. So the eyelash extensions that you're applying every day, those are definitely considered a cosmetic, so those are not allowed. The ones that are semi-permanent, where you go to an esthetician and they apply it to each individual eyelash, they do shed at the same rate as your regular eyelash, but there have been some facilities that have received 43s from the FDA for having compounders with those eyelash extensions. So definitely, if you're looking at all of that information, to me it is very clear that those should not be allowed in the compounding area. Now, when we talk to about nails, there's so many things that come up. So, fake nails. Mary and I love fake nails. We'd love to wear them all the time, but we still both work part-time in a hospital pharmacy. So guess what? We buy press-on nails for activities like this, and then we can pop them off before we go back to work. So there are ways to, to still beautify yourself and still be able to be a compounder the next day. So we want neatly trimmed, natural nails. So no nail polish, no nail extensions, no gel nails, no acrylics, nothing. Neatly trim. I was told by one of my mentors that it's how you were born with your nails, and no baby's been born with nail polish on their nails or nail extensions. So just neatly, naturally trimmed nails, so that we're not going to increase the amount of microbes that would be under that nail bed. So that's kind of the straight up answer about nails.
That's a great answer, and obviously people are, based on the amount of questions we got, a lot of people did like to have a deeper dive on that. I'm going to handle this one. It came in, people were asking about SCA rooms, sort of what they're going to have to do to clean the SCA room. The fact is, if compounding in an SCA is not really getting you out of anything. When you look at Table 10 in the chapter, it's pretty specific. The cleaning frequencies are for classified areas and within the perimeter of the SCA. So the frequencies for cleaning your walls, your floors, the primary engineering control, none of that changes. You're still going to need to use sterile disinfectants in your PEC. The only sort of caveat asterisk in that Table 10 are the ceilings, because in an SCA, generally you're not going to have a sealed ceiling.
Right.
So it says you don't need to clean the ceiling monthly unless it becomes visibly soiled or, a panel gets broken, anything like that. So SCA means you're still going to have to clean it just like it's a clean room. Okay. I was asked, can you move the tool when cleaning multiple hoods? You kind of could, but it's really not best practice. It's our Easy Reach tool that is, it's got a little hook on the end of that handle, and it is designed to live inside of that CPEC, the BSC, wherever you've got that tool, it's designed to live in there. When you start taking that tool and passing it from one PEC to another engineering control, you're just giving opportunities for cross-contamination, and I would not recommend that at all. KDAR. Does the Paradox RTU have to be double bagged, and is it gamma irradiated?
Yes, so when we're talking about a sterile disinfectant, Paradox is a sterilant. So what we're trying to do is accomplish the sterility around the packaging. So when we have a double bagged product, it allows you to detrash it as you go into more of the controlled environment. So wiping down, as Mary was speaking to, eliminating the potential for the microbes to go in, that double bag really helps you as you try to introduce it into the classified space. The other aspect of it, yes, it is gamma irradiated. It has the sterility assurance of 10 to the minus 6. So it gives you that valid and responsiveness that you need in that critical areas.
Since we're talking about Paradox, the question came in about proper ventilation and should they be wearing a mask when they're using Paradox?
A great question, and I know Mark has done a lot of research with this as well. So we have documents that help you with minimizing the exposure to these types of chemistries, because let's face it, everyone has a sensitivity with chemistries, right? So, and it all differs from all the different colognes that are out there and air fresheners. People can react to those. So now we're talking about a sporicide, right? So this level of kill efficacy needed, it gives you that level of potency. So when it comes down to what type of personal protective equipment you may require, we really encourage you to do an assessment. First, try to figure out how much is the occupational exposure limits with our best practices deployed, because I think we've been able to demonstrate a serious reduction in that exposure by just using some of our controlled application techniques. So it's really critical to not only use the documentation that we have, get in services from our Contec Healthcare sales reps and our partners out in the industry so that you can deploy that best practice and minimize that type of exposure.
Thank you, Kadar. Mark, we've got a couple of questions that have come in specifically about decontamination. I'm going to maybe sort of combine them, read them both out, and you can maybe try to address them both. So the first one was talking about rotation of cleaning agents, the best agents for decontamination of hormones, they specifically asked. And then someone asked, can they use Paradox or Preempt to decontaminate the PEC in between chemo compounds? So first of all, I'll say Preempt, because it's not sterile, you definitely can't use that in the PEC. So Mark, about the rotation of cleaning agents, best agents for decontamination of hormones, and then in between, decontaminating in between.
Okay, I'm glad you answered the preempt. I was going to go to the easy one first there.
I stole it.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine. There's plenty else other stuff there. So when we get into rotation, we're going to save that one a little bit later, because the decontamination is actually a little bit easier to talk about the work that we've done to show what Paradox can do with our protocols and our textiles to be able to reduce residues of hazardous drugs on surfaces. So, and when we talk about hazardous drugs, yeah, we've got these anti-neoplastics that a lot of people are really concerned about because they can cause a lot of long-term chronic effects through occupational exposure. But hormones also have a lot of reproductive hazards associated with them. So hormones, again, are considered NIOSH hazardous drugs, and we have done testing with Paradox to demonstrate that if I have dried residues of hormones on surfaces and I wipe those with Paradox, followed by IPA and many times in the CPEC, because we want to get rid of any of that residue, that we can reduce those by over 99.9%. So again, hormones are really no different in terms of the efficacy of paradox in terms of decontamination that we see with other hazardous drugs. Now, when it comes to rotation, it's really not something that we need to be concerned about in terms of decontamination, but people do still talk about rotation in terms of reducing the risk of resistance of microbes to disinfectants. But you've seen major CGMP-driven guidance documents, Annex 1, PDA. They've moved away from this idea that we have to rotate to avoid resistance. Rotation really means what we talk about in the chapter. We have a daily disinfectant that doesn't have to be a sporicide. Matter of fact, because of the potency of sporicides, we talk about not using them every day. We really need to be able to control the bioburden in our clean room by other means. But we have to use at least a germicidal product that can kill bacteria and fungi on a daily basis. And then at a longer frequency, I think the chapter is it monthly or? Yeah, no. So monthly with a sporicide to be able to capture and kill the spores that also could be getting into the clean room. So you could call that a rotation, but it's more of a scheme or just overall part of your SOP and procedures that are going to carry those two types of disinfectants. There's no evidence that they couldn't be the same type of chemistry or similar types of chemistry, because there is really no evidence that microbes can become resistant disinfectants. That's a situation with antibiotics, which behave in much different ways than disinfectants. And we can certainly get in a lot more detail. We've got technical bulletins that go into all those kind of descriptions and discussions, and we certainly can help you all with that.
I was just going to say a note, the application of the sporicide. So it's weekly for category 3 and monthly for category 1 and 2. So if you're doing category 3, that's sort of that higher risk, you will have a weekly required sporicide.
I just wanted to add about the hormones specifically that we tend to forget as well that a lot of retail pharmacies use a lot of the hormones, and those are powdered based. They'll make hormone capsules like bioidentical hormone therapies, creams and ointments with testosterone, estrogen powders. So sometimes we tend to forget about those guys that are doing any of those non-sterile compounds. So they also need to consider using a decontamination agent. It's not just for hospital use, it's also for those non-sterile compounding pharmacy use, because a lot of those compounding pharmacies make those types of formulations using hormones. So I just wanted to kind of add that piece of information.
Yeah, that's really for the protection of the folks that are compounding that medication. Yes. And then not, so it's super critical.
Absolutely.
This question, I'm going to leave this one over to Melanie and Mary, because it's talking about hazardous drugs. They want to know if they can get away with compounding them. I don't know, get away with, but can hazardous drugs be compounded under immediate use provisions?
So that's a very good question. So the new version of the chapter says when you're doing immediate use, you need to look at USP 800. So yes, you're going to be able to, but you're going to want to do your assessment of risk and kind of identify ways to protect the staff when they're making those preparations, because there's going to be probably some category 2 NIOSH table 2 and 3, or who knows when it's going to be just table 2, but drugs that may need to be made outside of the pharmacy. So
like oxytocin or phenytoin, like those, if you take away those rights of doing immediate use, that affects patient care.
Yes.
Right.
This one's an easy one, so I think we can all answer this with one word. Is cleaning underneath the fingernails required at every hand washing? Yes. So we've answered that question. Excellent. Melanie and Mary, someone asked about doing their monthly cleans. I'd like to more about cleaning, surrounding maintenance. Are they needed if, say, a ceiling tile is replaced, if the pass-through is fixed or replaced, if the base of the hood is fixed? So talk about what you're going to do after you sort of have to do maintenance on some of that equipment.
So it'd be great to be able to give like one answer for every type of environment, but we all know that our facilities vary, right? They're all designed differently. Plus, we also know that the maintenance can vary. We can get something very simple simple as if we're doing silicone maintenance, or we can get something complex where we're cutting into ceiling tiles that's going to create dust, debris, particles. So you're going to have to assess. Like, we can't just give you the answer and be like, oh, you have to do this. So if it's going to create particles, dust, you have to stop compounding while they're doing that, then it's going to be in your best interest to do a triple clean. So that's going to be really important. But if you're just doing silicone maintenance, then a daily clean is going to be okay, because you're not disturbing, you're not cutting into walls or getting exposure from above the ceiling or anything that's going to have exposure to a really high level of contaminants and particles. So, but if you're ever worried and you're ever in doubt, it's always best to just do the triple clean, and that way you'll sleep well at night knowing that you've taken care of any particular dust or particles that could have been introduced because of that type of maintenance. Yeah.
And then, Kedar, with the triple clean, which Contec products could they use for that triple clean?
With the Contec products, I mean, it really also depends on your assessment, right? There's no blanket statement for it, but obviously we'd have a rotation, if you will, from kind of that daily disinfectant and then that sporicidal disinfectant. And depending on some surfaces, you may want to remove that residue because we know that can potentially build and impact it for a cleaning process later.
Yeah, we've seen people do Paradox twice. They'll do like a Preempt plus Paradox,
exactly.
And just sort of, doing that.
And sometimes maybe a double clean will be enough if you just do Preempt and Paradox, and maybe you're okay with that. But it's really hard to give an answer for absolutely everything. Like if you're replacing floors, well, you're doing a post-construction clean, and then like it goes on and on, right?
So to find. You can't turn into the chapter and see what's a triple clean, what's a post-construction clean. So and again, it's that risk assessment for you, and then really your EM, your environmental monitoring.
Exactly.
Are you maintaining a state of control in that room?
And if you're still questioning, then reach out to your experts, right? Like there's so many other experts out there that can help answer these types of questions, that have been there, seen what happens in the field. So reach out to people that could help you with giving you the advice on what would be best in those circumstances.
That's a great point. Kedar, we had a question come in about PPE. So they were reading some of the requirements of the chapter, and that the garb, the gown, needed to have an enclosed neck. So what defines an enclosed neck on the garb, and what type of closure around the neck is considered enclosed?
Wow, yeah, that's a great question. I think that depends on the category that you're compounding, right? Because that's going to help you dictate what type of PPE you need. If we think back to what the garments are supposed to do, frock is supposed to protect the environment from us. Right, so you really want to have as much of the enclosed neck as possible. They also make some different bouffants and hoods that can cover up exposed skin, because we're trying to keep our skin flakes from getting into the environment. If we're thinking about the HD gown, we're trying to protect our employees from the materials that they're working with, right? So again, trying to cover up as much as you can, but still be comfortable. I mean, you don't want to have exposed clothing outside of it. You really want to keep that contained. But it really does really impact you on what category preparation you're making.
Thank you. I'll answer a couple of these that came in. Are long beards allowed? Yes, long beards allowed, but they've got to be totally covered. And the traditional, what we have traditionally called a beard cover, is not going to cover a lot of these new hipster beards that are getting bigger and bigger. They're going to need to wear full head covering to make sure that that's entirely enclosed.
Nothing wrong with hipster beards.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
It would be helpful to know what is specific to hospital settings versus outpatient clinical settings when compounding. It's that space isn't the defining thing. It's what your category is. So if you're doing category 1 compounding, you can compounding in an SCA using lower beyond use stating, you could do the immediate use provisions. Right. But if you're going to do category 2, you've got to build a clean room suite, and that doesn't matter if you're in a hospital or an outpatient setting.
Exactly.
So it's all defined by that. Maybe we can all sort of chime in on this one. They're talking about wiping eyeglasses because it's not specifically addressed in the chapter. So what Contec's always recommended is that you're using a disinfectant on the frames themselves, but only just like a lens cleaning sort of wipe on the eyeglass lenses themselves, so you don't mess with the coatings. But it can be challenging. How do you guys deal with that in your day-to-day operations?
Yeah, I think like in the beginning, people assume to use the EPA registered one-step germicidal, so like Preempt on the entire glass. the entire set of glasses, but that can be very damaging to the lenses. So using the lens cleaning solution, you can get them individually wrapped. So that would be perfect on the lenses. Again, some of these people have like Crizal lenses or bifocals. They're expensive. You really don't want to damage your employees' glasses. So I would really suggest exactly what you said. There's an individual wrap, lens cleaning solution on the lens, and then just the preempt on the frames themselves. Yeah.
And put it into when you're documenting what your protocols, your SOPs are for your garbing process and training people. That needs to be a part of it.
Right.
And you need to monitor and make sure they're actually doing it. And what we've seen on the field is people are really afraid that the germicidal detergent is going to ruin their frames, but we've seen it used in a lot of places, and people are not having problems with it. And
on the frames, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, on the frames, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to add the single-use aspect of it is critical too. You can potentially physically remove some of those potential contaminations as well as using that chemistry. So that single-use aspect of it is important.
And every time you go into the clean room, they must be wiped every time, not just at the beginning of the shift. So
That's a good point.
I mean, you're touching them constantly with your hands and pulling them off your face and adjusting them on the crown. So you're
They get very dirty.
Yes.
and pretty quickly. So
Yeah.
every time you come in, every garbing occurrence, you're going to be doing that. So that was a great question. This one we sort of already answered. They were asking about the requirements for the SEA, so it's the same as having a clean room. Gown usage for a full shift. So the chapter didn't change from 2008 to the new revision. Only your gown, though, if you can reuse that for one shift, make sure it stays inside the anteroom. But obviously your bouffants and your face mask and your booties are going to be replaced every single time. Now this one, I definitely need some help from an outside expert in it. It says compounding a banana bag. Can you add thiamine, folic acid to one IV bag? So I don't even know what a banana bag is.
Yeah, they were all asking me, what's a banana bag? So all us pharmacists out there know what banana bags are, and anyone working in an adult hospital, they're very common, so they definitely can be made. What's important with that is on your master formulation record, you're going to want to provide the BUD, how you found the BUD, and that the mixture of the components is compatible. So it's something, yes, that can definitely be compounded.
Mm-hmm. That hydrates you, right? A banana bag hydrates you?
Yes.
Yeah, we're in Vegas, so that's
Yeah.
a lot of people.
Walking up and down the casino to get here. There's a lot of people that could use banana bags.
Yeah,
Quite a business with that. Mary, this actually, while you've got the microphone, is compounding of blood products and biologics within the scope of this chapter?
So I think some people get confused that it's not within the scope of the chapter, but it is. You definitely want to be following 797, and I think USP Chapter 825 does a really good job of talking about handling blood products. So that's like a good resource to go to and kind of look through where they talk about blood products, because that I think is a component that's still missing from 797. But you still definitely, it is within the scope, and we want to keep those products or preparations as sterile as possible.
And it's definitely clearly written in the first
Yeah.
part of the 2022 revisions of the chapter that it is within the scope.
And so you want to make sure you have SOPs in place that show how you prevent cross-contamination with the blood products.
Excellent. Good question. Mark, so when they're decontaminating, this question came up a couple of times about in between decontaminating, and because the chapter 800 says you're supposed to decontaminate in between every individual CSP. And in the reality of people's workflow, sometimes they're making 4 or 5 preps for one patient, so they don't really want to necessarily decontaminate in between that. I'm not asking you to interpret what the CEC wrote there, but just talk about using the chemistries to decontaminate in between those preps.
Sure. So, we need to come back to that because I kind of skipped over it when we just said, you're going to have to use in the CPEC, it's going to have to be a sterile agent, whatever agent you select. And some of the decontamination agents for hazardous drugs that are on the market today are not actually sterile. So that is just not going to be a play any further. The Paradox is offered sterile, as Kadar has indicated, as well as some other agents that we have. But we recommend Paradox. And when we talk about in between CSPs, that's where, again, the chapter doesn't really delineate. It does actually say the work surface in the CPEC. So it's not talking about decontaminating the entire unit. It may not even really be talking about the decontaminating the entire deck. It really is talking about the DCA. And this is the area where, if there is a potential for cross-contamination of a CSP, of a hazardous CSP, that's where that would occur. Now, you gotta also maybe apply some logic to this when you're looking at the assessment of risk. If I'm preparing different CSPs of hazardous drugs for the same patient, it's really difficult to justify what the benefit is in decontaminating in between those CSPs. The patient is going to receive both those hazardous drugs during their administration regime. However, if I'm preparing different CSPs for different patients, or the same CSP for different patients of hazardous drugs, then we do need to follow what 800 says. But 800 doesn't say you have to go through this full process that we recommend for the daily cleaning of the CPEC, where I'm passing with 2 passes of Paradox and 1 pass of IPA. You can determine what level of decontamination is sufficient. And what we have been able to demonstrate is, if you don't have that much hazardous drug residue, and you really shouldn't in between CSPs, 1 pass with Paradox followed by IPA may be completely sufficient. So while sampling is still a should in USP 800, this can really help drive your work practices to match the risk that you see in your process. If people are using closed system transfer devices and other aspects, they are going to greatly reduce the amount of CSPs, residues that would be on there. And therefore, I don't have to go through a massive decontamination process unless I have an accident, a spill, something like that. So I know it's a long answer for a short question, but it's a complicated issue that really gets into how the regulations need to be examined on how do I practically apply them.
Well, especially in those busy cancer centers, they're going to be doing like hundreds and hundreds of preps. So if you're really requiring them to do 2 passes in between each prep, like that's very time consuming. So I totally agree with Mark. Like it's almost another risk assessment of You're using the CSTDs, you haven't had a drip, you're doing all of the same compounds for the same patient. Like you kind of have to use a little bit of like what would work well in your workflow.
Right. Excellent. Kadar, we had several questions come in about sort of, I guess, first of all, people sometimes say BUD when asking about a disinfectant. So, sort of, I guess we'll sort of correct them and say the use by date. But first question is specifically about sterile alcohol. So should they place a date on the sterile alcohol once it's open? I noticed it has a place on the label to put a use by date.
Right. Yeah, I think the resonating thing that you're hearing across the panel is risk assessment, using data to help you establish these protocols and procedures, right? And what you write in is going to be important. Contec, we've actually done a study on our sterile IPA solution so that when the trigger was installed, we actually maintained the sterility as well as the concentration of IPA over 90 days. Now, do we say just go with a blanket statement? No. I mean, it says defer to your manufacturer or do your own assessment. Hopefully you're using that consumable within that time frame so that we do have that documentation that we can share. The other aspect of it, we also have a ProSat, which is our pre-saturated wiper. So as long as it's sealed in the controlled environments, properly burped, we've actually been able to maintain that concentration over 30 days. So it really just depends on the chemistry type. I mean, are we talking disinfectants? Are we talking, these residue and cleaning aspects of residue cleaners? That's what you really want to try to pay attention to and lock in with your SOPs.
Yeah, with the sterile IPA, we recommend that you sort of leave it in the environment in which you open it. So if you've got a bottle of sterile alcohol and that's been used in your ISO 5 hood, keep it sort of in that ISO 5 hood. If you opened it in your ISO buffer room to clean off some items before you place them into your PEC, keep it there.
I would also like to add that anywhere that has a bottle of alcohol for 30 days, I'd be very, very shocked because we go through like water in those clean rooms. So usually maybe max they're in there for 24 hours. So but it's great that they have that long dating, but I doubt they last that long.
As long as you're maintaining a state of control in your room, you should feel confident using up that product till it's gone.
Absolutely.
People think, oh, it's sterile. Once I open it, it's no longer sterile. Well, technically that's true, but again, leaving it in that ISO environment where you opened it.
That's right.
It's really going to be critical, and then you can use that product up. And they, as Kadar said, they put that language in the chapter, specifically. So you said you may continue using it after it's open, so that people didn't think they had to automatically throw everything away.
Especially with the pre-saturated wipes, they're great. You can wipe the outside of the package, leave it in your ISO 5, and you're pretty much going to use it for the entire day. Don't bring it in and out, just leave it in there. And if you're using a spray bottle, which you're not going to use in an ISO 5, leave it in your buffer room for spraying gloves and everything else, as long as it's not an HD environment. I feel the same way. I feel very comfortable that if they're left in that environment, and again, we're using alcohol so frequently that we should absolutely be able to keep using it.
Kate, our same question about just disinfectants, about the beyond use dating. Again, we actually did a webinar in early 22 specifically about use by dates of disinfectants. But while we got folks here at home today, just talk briefly about that, the use by date on disinfectants versus alcohol.
Yeah, so a very similar aspect, keeping it in that controlled areas, making sure that you're doing your risk assessment. But use your manufacturer. Like, they should have some established data of when you can consume this material once opened, which we do. And so I would encourage you, one, like you mentioned, go to that webinar, watch that, because we do try to distinguish between BUD and use by dates in that. And it's really critical to understand that, because out of the scope of what we do is all that sterile preparation, right? So we want to focus in on the chemistry type. And then we also have documentation to help support them.
We were asked about donning gloves. So the 2008 chapter actually required you to don the gloves once you got into the buffer room, and now the new chapter just says classified space. So they're basically asking, would you now recommend that I don the gloves in the ante room, or keep it in the buffer room? I'd recommend buffer room, but I wanted to get y'all's thoughts.
I definitely think that it depends. Like, is it a shared ante room with an HD buffer room? Because if you're putting on 2 pairs of gloves, so you're going to need a pair of gloves in between both gowns, and then you're going to go into your HD buffer room, then maybe you should apply the first pair in the ante room. But there's so many other factors, like water, how
space there is.
Space is how tight, is the sink really close, splashing water. We wouldn't want to be garbing sterile gloves anywhere near like potential splashing water. What if it's a high traffic space? You have a lot of people going in and out of that ante room. Then maybe it's best to just don both pairs of gloves for HDs in the buffer room. So again, the risk assessment, you've got to decide what's going to be best for your environment. But yes, for non-HD, I would absolutely do them in the buffer room, again, if space allows, away from the ante room where there'd be potential for splashing water, people ungarbing and
that creates
leaving.
A lot of, when people are taking off garb and stuff, they're actually throwing out.
Another factor in that is if they have like automatic door openers or not. So do they have to, touch the door with their gloved hands?
Yeah.
So the answer is not as simple as you thought. It's really, you got to figure it out based on the room you're working in and sort of what you're dealing with there.
Absolutely.
Another physical question about lines of demarcation. They're asking if they can use tape. Tape's really not a good practice anymore. You need to use different color vinyl, or you can even weld in sort of a line of demarcation, but the tape is no longer a good thing to use.
Mm-mm.
All right, that we answered about the gloves. Melanie and Mary, thoughts on non-sterile bouffant and shoe covers that will be contained underneath the sterile coverall. So if they're doing Category 3, they got to have on the sterile garb. Can they wear non-sterile garb under that sterile garb?
Yeah, the chapter doesn't speak to that. I think that's acceptable. So as long as your outside garb is sterile, then you should be good.
Right.
Yeah, same thing. I think underneath you'll be fine, but that outside does have to be sterile. Mm-hmm. This actually we already sort of answered. They're transitioning from an isolator hood into a full clean room, which good. What steps should we take to clean our new room the first time? So we sort of talked about that post-construction clean earlier. One thing I'll throw out is add for Contec. We go out in the field and do a lot of training, but a general rule of clean room is you're not supposed to have unnecessary people, movement, materials inside a clean room. So it's sometimes difficult to do hands-on training with a large group actually inside a clean room space. So often I find myself in a break room or in a pharmacy office, just generally mopping a wall trying to teach people the principles. But if you've got new construction and you've not started compounding in there, that's your opportunity to bring all of your technicians in, bring your outside experts in, and do real world live training in that room before it goes live. So I would encourage whoever asked that question to definitely take that opportunity to step up your education game. You've got a really good opportunity.
I do want to clarify though exactly like what that post-construction clean would actually look like. So when we're talking about post-construction, you want to be able to wipe that surface until the wiper pad or the wiper does not have any signs of soiled, dirt, debris, or anything like that before you even think about doing your triple clean. So you want to make sure that that post-construction, it's got to be all of the debris removed, the dust, anything that could soil. So you really want to make sure that that wiper pad has, and that's for all surfaces in that room. So that would take part of your post-construction clean. Then you can start thinking of your triple clean.
Great for pointing that out. Last question, and thank everyone for getting these questions into us. Melanie, how will these affect Canadian compounders, the new chapter?
Yes, since I'm Canadian. So I'm going to try to keep this a bit short, but so Canada, we follow the NAPRA model standards for compounding. Those are our, what you would consider USP. Those are our requirements. They are a little bit closer to the version of USP797 2008. So we do not follow USP. We have our own standards. Every province, which is like states here in the US, decides whether or not they're going to adapt or adopt NAPRA. If they adopt NAPRA, then that's what we're going to follow. What USP becomes for us is a reference tool. So we can use it and read it and gain more information from it. Now, if any compounding facility or designated person or compounding supervisor in Canada likes what they see, they like that this chapter is really more focused on quality, and they want to implement some of those recommendations from USP or some of the musts and shoulds from USP into their practices in Canada, they really have to check with their pharmacy inspector, because their pharmacy inspector may not know how to go about inspecting at like that higher level or without the data or the information of what it says in USP. So I would suggest, I would highly recommend, if you want to operate at a higher level of quality, absolutely we should always be doing and striving for that for our patients, but please work with your pharmacy inspector, your College of Pharmacy, in order to be able to do that together, have the proper documentation, and not just get penalized because you're trying to do something at a higher standard. But yes, this chapter is definitely promoting a better quality of work, and everyone who does anything for patients, any healthcare worker, any pharmacist, should definitely be looking to improve their quality.
Just a final food for thought on that improving quality reminded me of it. One of the things that changed in the new chapter that I'm not a big fan of, in the opening paragraph of the chapter, 2008 said, the intent of this chapter is to describe the conditions and practices to prevent harm, including death to patients. Prevent harm, it really required ownership of that. The new revised chapter actually has changed that to minimize harm. The objective of this chapter is to minimize harm, and I feel like they may be taking a step back there. I've not asked anyone with the CEC their thoughts there, but I just wanted to sort of get our group's thought on, we're not changing our message of best practice. Go out there and prevent harm to your patient.
Absolutely. That is the only way to do it. When you're a healthcare professional, you signed an oath. You have an ethical responsibility to provide the best for your patient. So to me, when I hear minimize harm, it doesn't seem like it matches with my ethical and my professional standards. I feel like I need to prevent harm by putting the best quality product out there for our patients. And Mary, I'm sure you agree.
Totally agree, yes.
As a pharmacist, we're required to not harm a patient, not just minimize it, but prevent it and provide them with the best quality preparations, whether it be non-sterile, sterile compounding, or any type of dispensing of medication.
Well, we can certainly be there to help you find that best practice to prevent harm to your patients. Kadar, thank you. Mark, thank you. Melanie and Mary. And thank everyone at home that asked us these questions. We're here live at ASHP in Las Vegas, so we're having a great time, but we did want to sit down to answer all those questions that came in after the webinar. We're sitting here in early December. That means we've got 11 months until the new chapter goes live. Don't wait until the end. You've got 11 months to make these changes, and we're here to help you. Thank you for watching.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you so much to our panel of experts, and thank you for joining us today. Before we close today's presentation, here's Michael with some closing thoughts.
And I had the opportunity to grab Patty Keenley with Cardinal. So first of all, Patty is not here in any official capacity with USP, but we just had a great opportunity to answer all of the questions that people asked us about cleaning and disinfecting, hand hygiene and garbing. But they've got 11 months now until the chapter goes live. So I just wanted to grab you to see if you had any words of encouragement as they prepare down these next roads of getting ready with the chapter.
Well, I always love to put things in small number of buckets. So my buckets here are your facilities, your personnel training, and then your work practices that are there. So facilities, I certainly hope that if people are still not compliant, that they have an action plan so that they have presented this to their boss and whomever needs to in their organization to be able to make sure that those changes need to be made and need to be in. I realize it's capital expense issues. From a personnel training thing, read the revision in 797 and 795 if they're doing non-sterile as well, because it's a good list of what the elements are. And my suspicion is that's what state boards and accreditation organizations are going to be looking for first. And certainly that's, all of the implements of what we want to do for safety. And the work practices, look how you move those things around. How do you have your aseptic technique done? How do you clean and disinfect those areas and decontaminate them when necessary? And kind of go with those three.
Thank you so much. And as you see, you've got a lot to do in these next 11 months. But Contec's here to support you. And Patty, thank you for dropping by the booth.
Thank you, Michael.
Have a great show.
Okay, sounds good.